Aloha, good evening, and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. I'm Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm here in for Tucker. Now, the warrant behind the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago has been released, and we have brand new details this hour on what exactly prompted that raid and what Joe Biden's Justice Department was looking for. So here's what we know right now. The FBI removed nearly a dozen sets of documents that the DOJ claims are classified. Former President Trump, however, disputes this and said all the records in question have been declassified. So other documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago included binders of photos and, oddly, a grant of clemency for Roger Stone. Now, the raid was also apparently far more expansive than initially thought. The warrant granted FBI agents the authority to seize, quote, all physical documents and records that contained evidence of crimes dating all the way back from January 20th, 2017 to the day Donald Trump left office in 2021. In other words, every single document from his presidency was potentially up for grabs. And we now also know the FBI waited 3 days to execute the raid after Judge Bruce Reinhart signed off on the warrant. Now, if this was truly a matter of national security, as Attorney General Merrick Garland told us yesterday, why did it take federal agents so long to raid Mar-a-Lago? Now, to answer this and many more questions, we turn now to Fox News chief legal correspondent and the new host of Fox News Sunday, Shannon Bream. Hi, Shannon. How are you?
Hey, Tulsi. Great to be with you. So glad to see you in tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing your expertise as we get all of this new information on the legal aspects of these documents, what's been seized, and frankly, what will hold up as we move forward.
Yeah, to me, what is interesting and what I'm really watching for is the good stuff. That's all the underlying documentation to that warrant. So, yes, we got the warrant today. We thought, we're trying to tell the people, don't get too excited. It's going to be pretty basic. And even that itemization list of what they took, boxes of this, folders of that, all the good stuff we want to know. What underlies this entire effort is in those affidavits. That's not something I think that the DOJ will willingly release. What we do know is that there are a number of entities, Judicial Watch, a couple of media outlets, including the New York Times, who have actually filed motions to unseal all of it. And the judge in this case has given the government until 5 p.m. on Monday to respond to that request. So the judge is at least considering it. And once we get to those things, that will give us much more information about so many gaps that we currently have in the story.
Shannon, what do you make of the expansive nature of this probe? I mean, to literally put on the line every single document that existed during the Trump presidency. Is there a precedent for this? I mean, this seems like a gargantuan task.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in this case is, as you know, unlike any we've ever seen before in the history of this country. I mean, a raid by federal agents on a former president's residence. There's nothing about this that we can actually compare to anything else because it's the first of its kind in so many ways. But because of that reference in the warrant to all of those presidential documents, it takes us back to this argument that there's been with the National Archives about presidential records. The president and his team, meaning the former president and his legal team, have said, we were having negotiations. We thought we were having a good conversation before this raid about those documents.
There's a lot to take in here, Shannon. Thank you so much for your expertise, and congratulations again on being named the new host of Fox News Sunday. We'll all be watching when you launch next month.
Thanks. Have a great show.
Thank you, Shannon. For more on what today's warrant actually means, we're now going to turn to Harmeet Dillon. She is a phenomenal attorney and the chairwoman of the Republican National Lawyers Association. Harmeet, thank you so much for joining us. You have been watching this as it has played out kind of moment by moment. What do you make of these new developments that we've just learned today?
Well, what we know that has been confirmed by the search warrant being revealed is that it was extremely broad, like Shannon just pointed out. And what we don't know, and what everybody wants to know, is what was the justification presented to a federal judge to take this extraordinary step on the part of the United States Department of Justice. And so, generally speaking, that search warrant affidavit or affidavits are not unsealed until there's an indictment. And even then, if there are national security implications, they could be restricted to the target of that subpoena and or the search warrant rather, and his attorneys. And so it's going to be a while probably before we see that. And I suspect that the Department of Justice is not keen to reveal exactly why they took this step. But what we can also say is that a federal magistrate judge does have the ability, and in fact, I think the duty, to cut back on a subpoena that seems overbroad for the circumstances. Now, in reality, they often just rubber stamp them. That's a real problem in our judicial system, and I think that's what happened here. And I really my mind is blown that this can be a justified search of a former president. And so this is deeply troubling for anybody who cares about civil liberties in our country.
I couldn't agree more. Has there been any discussion or what possible steps could be taken to explore any potential conflict of interest given this specific judge who approved this warrant, given his previous political contributions and kind of political leanings?
Well, just about every judge these days has some political leanings or contributions. That itself is not a problem. But this specific judge has made specific negative remarks about President Trump, and I think they rise to the level of recusal. But at this point, after the judge has already issued this ex parte search warrant, which is how it goes, there's really nothing that can be done to unwind that specifically. But a party who believes that a search warrant has been executed unlawfully or it is overbroad or what have you can make certain motions in the criminal system. There's Rule 4 and there's some other moves that can be made to get the return of this evidence. But there are many fishy things about this, Tulsi, including the fact that the government apparently was given access to these documents in June, and their request to the former president was to put a padlock on the room, and everybody went away and thought that this was all under control on the Trump side. And then suddenly they come in with this sort of librarian issued SWAT team to take these drastic steps. And I think that that is very odd. And what it seems to me, and I'm not changing my view based on seeing the search warrant, this was a massive fishing expedition to see if they could concoct any evidence of anything. That is not how warrants are supposed to work in America. And that should outrage every civil libertarian.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is about so much more than whether or not people support Trump or against Trump. This is something that is directly connected to every one of our civil liberties. Thank you so much, Harmeet. I really appreciate your analysis, as always.
Thank you.
Now, legal analysts quickly noted after the warrants released today that it was essentially impossible for Donald Trump to have classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. And they argue this because of his executive authority as president to declassify. Now, anything he took with him to Mar-a-Lago was therefore by default declassified. Now, the former president himself said all the documents in question were declassified. But the question is, will that argument hold up in a court of law? Now, James Gagliano is a retired FBI supervisory special agent, and he joins us now. Thank you so much, James, for joining us. I'm really interested to hear your take on this because I hear people arguing both sides of, classifications obviously are meant to be taken very seriously. The president has the authority to declassify anything at any time for any reason. How do you respond to these arguments on both sides of this?
So first of all, Tulsi, let's unpack that. So there are essentially three levels of classification: top secret, secret, and confidential. Sometimes there's restricted, law enforcement sensitive, but the matters here with those three. Now, we know from seeing an inventory list of what the FBI took that they took documents of each types of those. Now, here's where it gets interesting, all right? You also, in issues like this, just like you're going back to the Clinton private email server, there has to be the willful component to this, right? A crime is two parts, right? Actus reus, which is the act, and then mens rea, which is actually the thought that I'm committing a crime. President Trump did not pack these boxes. Whether it was GSA or some other entity in the government, the president didn't pack these boxes individually. And the fact that attorneys, his and attorneys from the National Archives and Records Administration, were actively engaged in working out a deal here to have them turned back over, and then they do this, I don't understand it. I don't get the exigency, Tulsi. It is mind-boggling.
Yeah, this whole thing, as it's been playing out, all of the details, you think, okay, well, maybe we'll learn more and maybe this will start to make more sense. But it seems like, especially with the information that's been released today, all we have are more questions. Throughout your career in the FBI, have you ever seen something so expansive in any scenario with any person of interest? To me, it was just shocking again to hear that they wanted to look at virtually any and every document through the Trump presidency.
Well, when you get a search warrant, it's very specific, right? So it tells you
Right.
what you can look for. If you're looking for a pistol that you believe was part of a crime, a homicide, you can't look in a small jewelry box, right? You have to do it
Exactly.
within those confines. What baffles me is when I heard that they dropped the Foreign Espionage Act, where people's heads are exploding and they're saying, hey, this means that the president was spying. He was talking to Hanoi or Moscow or Pyongyang.
Right.
No, it's a whole host of other things, and it's just a matter of mishandling classified documents. Still blows my
Thank
mind
you.
this was the route we went.
Thank you. Thank you, James. You make a lot of great points there.
Thanks
Now,
for
the
having me.
FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago was a major escalation of the weaponization of the security state on the American public. It's about to get much worse because right here before the midterms, we're seeing these entities being politicized and weaponized. Now, here's just one example. Twitter just announced it's rolling out their new misinformation rules to, quote, protect conversation on Twitter during elections. David Sachs is the co-founder of Craft Ventures and host of the All In podcast. I'm a fan of the podcast. He joins us here on set. It's so great to see you. I'm smiling as we're hearing this new announcement coming from Twitter again to control conversation and define essentially what misinformation is. You've got a lot of a background here.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are legitimate things, Tulsi, that Twitter could do to improve the integrity of our elections. They could basically help prevent bot or spam accounts from posting. You know, if Joe from Idaho posts something under that handle, it'd be nice to know that it really is Joe from Idaho and not some foreign actor or basically a bot who's trying to amplify sentiment. But the part to be, I think, concerned about this policy is where they say that they're going to take down misinformation that could jeopardize user safety. And we saw that during COVID. This was the code word, this idea of user safety that was used to take down wrong think about COVID.
Right.
And a lot of that opinion actually ended up turned out to be true. And part of the problem here is that Twitter's employees have a real blind spot with regard to their partisan bias. It's something like 99% Democrat. And so there's a lot of issues where they think it's misinformation, but really it's just that that's their opinion on the matter. And no one has a monopoly on the truth, and it's very dangerous when they start censoring information that's relevant to an election based on what they think their view of the truth is. And it'd be a lot better, whatever problems we have with misinformation in this country, it'd be a lot better to let voters decide for themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what further highlights that point is when we know of examples that have been exposed publicly, how this administration has been working directly with Twitter, whether it was back when we were talking about the Ministry of Truth or some more recent accounts that the Biden administration was concerned about, saying, hey, we'd appreciate it if you, why is this guy still on Twitter? Why hasn't he been blocked or canceled or so on and so forth? And so when you have that direct connection, it's not even a question of who they're working for. What to speak of the end run around the First Amendment?
Right, and you saw that, that was, there was an example where Jen Psaki admitted from the White House podium that they're working with social networks to take down, supposed COVID misinformation. Right. It's not appropriate for government to be coordinating with private companies to censor the free speech rights of American citizens. But, a lot of this isn't just nefarious. It's sort of a result of misunderstanding because the two sides really talk past each other because Twitter employees, by and large, are only part of one political bubble. And so you saw an example just recently where there are people now talking about taking down or censoring the hashtag civil war because they're saying that conservatives and civil libertarians are actively calling for violence. Well, that's not what they're saying. They're concerned that a civil war is being declared on them because of this raid at Mar-a-Lago, because of things like the Ministry of Truth that the Department of Homeland Security tried to impose, which, by the way, is a federal law enforcement agency.
Exactly.
So conservatives have real reasons to be concerned.
Back to the basics, civil liberties, freedom, and the Constitution. And I think what's so concerning to people is that we have government finding ways to try to undermine those fundamental freedoms. Thanks for all that you do on this, and appreciate your voice.
Thanks,
Great to see you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago earlier this week marked the beginning of a new and dangerous path for America. We're going to recap the week and explain what this all means straight ahead. Now, whatever your views are on Donald Trump, there's no denying that the unprecedented raid on his Palm Beach home earlier this week has set our country on a dangerous new course, and there's no turning back. The FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago change the country that we grew up in. We grew up believing that, hey, our government will apply the law equally to all Americans, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. We're seeing more and more that that country no longer exists. Law enforcement at the highest levels of government, whether it's the DOJ, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and now even the IRS, have been weaponized to target the political opponents of the Uniparty, the permanent Washington, and the Biden regime. Attorney General Merrick Garland has already issued a stark warning to anyone who dares to disagree with these tactics that are all hallmarks of a dictatorship.
Let me address recent unfounded attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and Justice Department agents and prosecutors. I will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked.
So you are not allowed to disagree with the FBI. That is the new message. The security state will label you an extremist for daring to challenge or disagree with the regime's weaponization of law enforcement.
They talk about defending the blue. They talk about defending law enforcement officers. They fly the flags. They put on the bumper stickers. And yet, if it doesn't suit their political purposes, then they remain silent or even attack law enforcement officers. The senator talked about the FBI's attack on our constitutional republic. Another Republican senator accused them of being a third world Marxist dictators. And yet, the silence is deafening.
These guys aren't Republicans, Joe. These guys are extremists.
Will Cain is a co-host on Fox and Friends Weekend and one of our favorite lawyers. He was actually hosting this show when the news broke of the Trump raid. Will, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
So happy to be with you, Tulsi.
So much to talk about, so little time. First question, is this America? Is this the United States of America now, where our Attorney General, the Attorney General of the United States, the top law enforcement official in this country, is saying you are not allowed to disagree as an American?
It's the United States of America, Tulsi. It's something you and I both still love and will fight to preserve. But it's the United States of America sitting on a very fragile piece of thin ice. And it's because the American people have lost faith in their institutions. Rightfully skeptical, the American people now worry that every aspect of not just our culture, but our government has been completely and utterly politicized. Hey, Tulsi, I began the week on Monday, and you are finishing our week out on Friday. And I want to say this, if I might. It's important that we look at the details, the trees. We look at the warrant. We understand the issue, but we can't lose the forest. And the forest is this, that this has nothing to do with classified documents. This simply has nothing to do with the retention of documents at Mar-a-Lago. This is about, as you mentioned, permanent washing, ensuring that Donald Trump is never again president of the United States. And I know that, Tulsi, if I may say, through two things: inconsistency and consistency. The inconsistency is the application of our law. The FBI is not interested in Hunter Biden. It's not interested in Hillary Clinton. It's not interested in Eric Swalwell. It's not interested in applying the law uniformly. On the other hand, the consistency is that for 6 years, Tulsi, whether or not it was Russia collusion or the Steele dossier or President Trump grabbing the steering wheel of the beast, or it was Hunter Biden's laptop, the consistency is it's been a constant attack on the presidency and the campaign of Donald Trump and the protection of permanent Washington. This is what the American people can now see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more in your point about how we've got to take a step back and look at the bigger picture here. And the details matter, but we can't get lost in the minutia. We should all be concerned that leaders in Washington are not all, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, standing up and saying, hey, this is not okay. We have to ensure that these public institutions maintain their independence and integrity and accountability to the American people, not to whichever political party may be in power.
Yes. I think it would be entirely too naive to say this is all in service of the Democratic Party. It is, yes, in part in service of the Democratic Party, but it is in service of permanent Washington. Donald Trump threatened to take a butcher knife to the federal bureaucracy, the administrative state, and that is the biggest threat that there exists in Washington, D.C. And then we get trotted out absurdities like this retention of classified documents. You know, look, nuclear codes that took 18 months to put the FBI into action, that's a joke. It's more believable that Elizabeth Warren was having people come up to her and say, I'd vote for you if you had a penis. That's what Politico reported. That's more believable than this was about nuclear codes. This wasn't about nuclear codes. It wasn't about classified documents. It was about the protection of permanent Washington.
That's right, Will. And this isn't just some theory that you and I are talking about, because Chuck Schumer said it in broad daylight back in 2017 when he said, hey, if you mess with the intelligence community, they will screw you 10 ways from Sunday. It doesn't get any more clear than that, than really a blatant statement and message to everyone that the security state is real, and don't you dare challenge them or you'll have a target on your back.
Yeah, and as recently as a couple of weeks ago, if you don't believe the voice of Tulsi Gabbard or Will Cain, Axios was reporting that Donald Trump was going to axe easily 50,000 administrative employees in the federal government. I'm sure that stretched into the FBI and into the intelligence community as well, were he to be elected to a second term. So I think it's clear what the threat was, and I think it's clear the motivations, what we're seeing from the security state.
I hope everybody's paying attention to this, and we can't expect people in Washington to solve this. We, the people, have to stand up and make sure our voices are heard. Thank you so much, Will. It's great to see you. Great to talk to you.
You're doing a great job, Tulsi.
Thank you. There is no better example of the two-tier justice system that we are facing here in America right now than Hunter Biden. Now, Donald Trump gets raided by the FBI while Hunter Biden is protected by the agency. This same FBI buried damaging but, quote, verified and verifiable information about Hunter Biden by labeling it as disinformation. Just after the Mar-a-Lago raid, Hunter Biden boarded Air Force One with his father to go on a vacation at a $20 million South Carolina mansion. Now, here with us today is Adam Carolla. He's a comedian and an author. Adam, how are you?
I'm well.
What do you think about this dichotomy and this, what we're seeing play out here, and this different standard?
You know, it's kind of weird. Whenever you hear about AI becoming awoke and woken up, and now AI has to kind of protect itself, and the drone that the military used to control, it loses control over AI because it now has intelligence. Doesn't it feel like what's happening to Washington? Like they woke up and they went, oh, we got to save ourselves here, so we'll just weaponize anything we want. As far as Biden and the Trump raid and everything like that, it's insane when you turn on the TV and watch Andrew McCabe on CNN explain that the raid on Trump's house, well, first off, raid, that's not a word anymore, just like inflation isn't, and just like recession isn't, but totally necessary. But this is the same guy that was telling us that the Steele dossier was real and that the Hunter Biden laptop was fake. So how much credibility does Andrew McCabe or any of those hacks have on the other side? It's either stupid or liar. If you're Andrew McCabe, you're either so stupid you can't tell the difference between a fake dossier and a real laptop, or you're lying, which is what you're doing. But spare me, because I'm not coming to you anymore and going, hey, let's see what McCabe's head on this is. Maybe that raid was warranted. Let's hear what he has to say. Oh, surprise, surprise, it was warranted, says the apparatus.
Exactly. They lie in broad daylight, and they wonder why the American people don't have any faith or trust in our government, in Congress, in these public institutions, in this administration. They're scratching, how do we do this? How do we message things differently or package them differently? It's like, you're the problem.
Yeah, how about not lying?
Exactly. Tell the truth.
It's a thing. It's like you have the worst pizza place on the corner, and you're going, how do we package this differently? We need a new box.
That's right.
We'll get a fat Italian woman and put her on the front. It's like, how about you make good pizza?
There you go. Make good pizza. Let's throw that on a bumper
Make
sticker.
good pizza. And yes, it's obviously these guys are full of it. And as far as Hunter's laptop goes, I mean, 51 intelligence agents say, I mean, they're lying. They're not stupid enough.
Worse than lying, Adam. They were interfering. Intelligence officials interfering with our elections.
And they're going to turn Donald Trump into a martyr, a heavy-set, golfing, private flying martyr. You don't normally see them, but they're turning him into one.
We got to wrap it up here, Adam. Thank you so much. I appreciate your perspective. Thanks for being here. Now, Joe Biden has told us that our proxy war with Russia would have a cost and that we would have to pay the price. Well, we are. Europe is facing massive energy blackouts. How long before that's happening here in our neighborhoods? That's what's coming up next. Europe is in a massive energy crisis right now, with the price of electricity in France just hitting record highs. Their government is ordering businesses to cut back on the use of illuminated signs and advertising. In Berlin, Germany, they're turning off non-essential traffic lights at night. Millions could be without heat this winter. In Spain, it's now illegal in some places to put your AC below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The UK is bracing for wide-scale blackouts this winter. Why is all this happening? Because of Joe Biden's sanctions that are nothing short of a modern-day siege. Now, this comes at a great cost, but Joe Biden told us, hey, this is necessary to defend Ukraine.
Defending freedom will have cost for us as well, and here at home. We need to be honest about that. But as we do this, I'm going to take robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours.
Now, there are costs for us, but it's not Joe Biden paying the price. Vladimir Putin is not either. Russia's energy revenue is higher now than before the war in Ukraine began. This is a supply problem that Joe Biden created, one that Russia is now profiting from. There is no cost, no amount of death, destruction, and suffering that'll get in the way of permanent Washington fulfilling their agenda. Now, remember former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright? She said that 500,000 dead Iraqi children were worth the Clinton administration's sanctions.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. It is a moral question, but the moral question is even a larger one. Don't we owe to the American people and to the American military and to the other countries in the region that this man not be a threat?
Now, despite their lectures and their crocodile tears, it's never been about morality. It's not about the people of Ukraine or protecting democracy. This is about regime change in Russia and exploiting this war to strengthen NATO and feed the military-industrial complex. Now, to Joe Biden, it's even about bringing about, quote, a new world order. We've got to lead it, he says. And he's trying to do just that, even if it means bringing us to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis is a combat veteran and author, and he joins us now. Danny, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tulsi.
Talk to me about sanctions. You know, this is a word that politicians often throw out. It's their knee-jerk reaction to anything. We got to go punish them with sanctions. But who actually pays the price?
Yeah, you know, we are absolutely addicted to sanctions. I mean, anyone talks about anything internationally, sanctions is the first thing that comes up before they even think about the ramifications or even the possibility that it could accomplish anything. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make, is that we don't understand that whether that tool can accomplish something or is it just something we throw out there. Now, in this particular case, I think it's really important to point out that if the president was asking us to potentially sacrifice something that could actually make a difference, that could potentially turn the tide of the war, that might be one thing. Potentially the cost would be worth it. But Tulsi, there is no chance, no military path that Ukraine can win this war. There simply isn't. We have to be honest about that. And so that if you keep these sanctions on there and they hurt us more than they hurt Putin, I mean, you hit it right on the head there. Because the sanctions have limited how much oil they have sold the Russians, and it has accelerated the amount of money that they've made. So it's not working on them. But as you pointed out there, all those problems about Europe, it's about to hit even worse, and it could come back on our country as well. And this winter could be a very decisive case in this whole war if the Western people across the Western world turn against us, because they're saying, hey, we don't recognize an actual threat of any kind of invasion from Russia, but we sure do recognize the cost that we're paying.
You're exactly right, Danny, and it's not a question of if that'll happen. It's something that we are already seeing happening, where different countries in the world, different people are experiencing the effects of this administration's policies and sanctions and are turning towards us in a more antagonistic fashion than they would otherwise. Thank you so much, Danny. I appreciate your expertise always. It's great to have you here on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tulsi.
And when the United States completed the withdrawal of our armed forces from Afghanistan 1 year ago this month, it marked the end of the longest war in American history. A small special operations teams first deployed to Afghanistan in the days after 9/11 to disrupt and destroy al-Qaeda's organization. They were extremely effective in accomplishing that mission. But soon after, our political and military leaders embarked on the fool's errand of nation building and trying to build a mini America in Afghanistan. There was no clear, achievable, and feasible strategy to reach that objective. Nonetheless, 4 consecutive presidents from both political parties, leaders at the Pentagon, leaders in Congress continued to wage this war even though they knew it was failing.
And the lesson that I've learned over the years is that you have to stay engaged in these situations. Nobody likes it. It's long. It's tedious. But right now we have, so I would say we must be engaged in this.
Is that what you will tell the parents of those 2 soldiers who were just killed in Afghanistan? Well, we just have to be engaged. As a soldier, I will tell you that answer is unacceptable. We have to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. We are in a place in Afghanistan where we have lost so many lives. We've spent so much money, money that's coming out of every one of our pockets, money that should be going into communities here at home, meeting the needs of the people here at home. We are no better off in Afghanistan today than we were when this war began. A withdrawal from Afghanistan needed to happen. It just should have happened almost 20 years ago. Like so many of you, I was horrified as I watched this disastrous withdrawal unfold on television last year. How could it be that after 20 years of war, this administration was so completely ill-prepared to leave? Now, 1 year has passed, and there's been no apology. There's been no accountability at any level in this administration, especially to the families of the 13 service members who were killed at Abbey Gate. But as we remember the withdrawal 1 year on, one thing remains true. The failures of our leaders will never take away the great honor and selflessness shown by those who sacrificed on the battlefield. The thousands of Americans who fought in Afghanistan, they fought for each other and they fought for our country. Now, Jack Carr is the author of The Terminal List, now a hit show on Amazon Prime. He's also a former Navy SEAL veteran who served in Afghanistan. Jack, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you have some thoughts and feelings, especially as we look at what happened 1 year ago.
I do, and as does every person who went over there and put their life on the line, and some who returned home facing the physical and the emotional trauma of their experience over there. But we learned early on in special operations in particular to not rush to your death. And that means to take a breath, look around, make a good, thoughtful call for those on your left and right. That's what you owe them. That's what you owe their families. That's what you owe the mission. And instead, what happened at a strategic level, as we got down to these final days in Afghanistan, is we rushed to our death. And that's why so many Americans who never had any touch point with the military whatsoever could apply a bit of common sense to what they were seeing on television and start asking questions. Why did we give up Bagram? Why did we put our service members at a tactically disadvantageous position at the Kabul airport, which resulted, unfortunately, in those deaths at Abbey Gate? And to say nothing of those who are still dealing with those the physical wounds of that day and the emotional wounds of that day. We rushed to our death at the end. It was unnecessary. We had 20 years to learn lessons, and we neglected to do that. We didn't even go back to the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. We didn't go back to the British experience. We didn't even have to go back to Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great. We had our own 20 years of experience in Afghanistan, and we neglected to apply those lessons to our withdrawal, and it really is unforgivable, as is the accountability. We have seen over that 20 years, zero accountability from our senior leaders, and that continues to this day. They have all failed upward.
Yeah, Jack, I know you've spoken and written a lot about this and about how, especially in recent history, and you're a student of history and a prolific reader and author, how general officers are no longer held accountable. As you say, they're promoted upward. What do you say to the families who are looking for that accountability as we wrap up here?
well, that's what we owe not just those families, but future generations as well. If we fail to take these lessons and apply those lessons going forward as wisdom, then those deaths have been in vain. That's what we really owe them, is to apply those lessons going forward as wisdom. But we can look back. We can look back to what was our country like before 1947 and after 1947. We stopped holding our senior military leaders accountable for whatever reason after World War II. George Marshall did it before World War II, all through World War II, put those generals and admirals, all those names that we know today as those who led us to victory, we all know those names. After World War II, we stopped firing those admirals and those generals who didn't measure up for whatever reason, and that continues today. And that's going to have to change if we want the populace, the citizens, to trust in our military leadership.
And the results speak for themselves. Jack, thank you for your service, your leadership, and your voice. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Now, sports leagues around the world are now allowing biological males to compete against biological females, all in the name of trans rights. I'm really looking forward to our next guest. UFC champion Carla Esparza is one of the few female athletes who's willing to stand up and say something about this. She'll be joining us in just a few minutes. Sports leagues all over the world are allowing biological males to compete against biological females in the name of transgender equality. Now, in professional surfing, a man who now goes by the name Sasha Jane Lowerson won first place in the Western Australian State Championships. And in mixed martial arts, a biological male named Fallon Fox was allowed to fight against a female. Now, the fight went as you'd expect. Fox broke the skull of female fighter Tamika Brents. So what do female athletes have to say about this? I'm so glad we have Carla Esparza here in studio with us today, who can tell us about this. Carla, thanks for joining us. I'm so thrilled to hear what you have to say, because this isn't an idea for you. You have been a pioneer in the sport of mixed martial arts, and you fought against men. What does this mean, especially within the field that you're in?
Well, this is a very important issue for me, and it's one that's been really popular in the media lately. I want to preface by saying that I do support people's right to be who they want to be, and I think inclusion is important. But with that being said, I feel that fairness and safety in sport is more important. And, you know, although with fighting, with combat sports in general, there's an inherent risk. But just as we don't allow performance-enhancing drugs because it gives people an unfair advantage to inflict damage on their opponent, I believe that coming into our sport with a physiological advantage does the same.
Yeah, you know, I had a chance to spend some time with those who were competing in swimming in college and in volleyball, and they were very concerned about the unfair biological and physical advantage that biological males have when they're competing against them, and obviously taking away a lot of opportunities that they see. So that speaks very clearly to the unfairness aspect of it. But as a mixed martial artist in your sport, there's a lot more that's at stake here. So even those who are saying, hey, well, we should find ways to be inclusive, there are very real consequences to this, and only you can speak uniquely to what those are.
Most definitely. You know, I believe when it comes to safety, we need to have science prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there is no advantage, because we're in the danger business, we're in the fight business, and we can get hurt out there. You know, I've seen some recent studies that do show that, you know, even up to 2 years of hormone therapy, there's still an advantage. So, you know, taking away opportunities from girls such as scholarships, paydays, you know, just positions and victories is just unfair. And, you know, like I said, until the science can prove that it is fair, I don't think they should have trans athletes in female sports.
Yeah, you know, I know as you go around, obviously you're the reigning champion right now, and you spend a lot of time with young women and girls who really look up to you and are inspired by the example that you've set and aspire to achieve some of the things that you have. And I know that you feel as strongly as I do that we need to make sure that they have those avenues to be able to do that as women.
Most definitely. And as a pioneer of this sport, you know, I am familiar with the battle for inclusion. You know, I fought myself through so many challenges, you know, just to get where we are today, not only in mixed martial arts, but in wrestling and jiu-jitsu. So, you know,
Thank you, Carla. I'm so sorry. We've got to cut it off there. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you.